In this video, I want to focus on a word that James uses to describe himself. James chapter number 1, verse number 1, very first few words here of this verse, it says, James, a servant of God. James uses this word, servant. I want to focus on that word because this word tells us a lot about James, and it is packed full of truth that we can apply to our own lives. When you look at the word servant, it carries with it a serious level of humility. And truly, we get a really good handle on the humility that James is showing here when we understand just who James is. You see, James is the pastor of the church of Jerusalem, a significant church, the beginning of it all. James is a very, very important player. He's an important person. In Galatians chapter number 2, James is called a pillar of the church. He has an important position. James is also the half-brother of Jesus. He comes from an important family. And so when you see James open up this book, this epistle, what does he say? We don't hear James saying, James, the half-brother of Jesus, or James, the very, 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 very important pastor from Jerusalem. We see James, a servant, mentioned here. That is significant. When we go back to the original Greek with this word servant here in James chapter number 1, verse number 1, it's the word doulos. And when we look at that word, what that means is a bond servant. And in common day vernacular, that really means slave. That means slave. Let that sink in for a minute. I know we hear that word slave and automatically everyone wants to hit the brakes and they're offended by that word. They don't feel good about that word. American history and many nations across the world have a history of slavery where they put people in bondage and had these different kinds of things. It's important that we mention here today, we're not talking apples to apples with America's past slavery or Britain's past slavery or any nation's past slavery. Even in Africa, Africans were selling Africans into slavery. We're not talking apples to apples here. What we are talking about is a slavery that James is happy to be in, and it is a voluntary slavery. A very, very different situation than all of those other situations. But what we do see here is James is not just humble, but he's submitted. Think about a slave. A slave is completely and totally submitted. Not what I want, but what my master wants. Not what I think, but what my master thinks. Can I tell you today, Christians need to get into this place where we're seeking less of what we want and more of what he wants. We need to get to a place in our lives where we are focused on pleasing the master with our lives. We are focused on hearing those words, well done, thou good and faithful servant, when we finally meet the Lord. We do not hear, well done, thou good and faithful servant, from living life for ourselves and from pleasing ourselves. We hear those words if we are focused on serving the Lord. We hear those words if we are focused on pleasing the Lord. James truly here, what he is doing is he's putting God in a high position. He's putting himself in a low position and putting God in a high position. He's saying, God, I am looking to you. I am worshiping you. I'm looking for what pleases you. I'm looking to serve you in any capacity that I possibly can. So often in our lives, we flip the script. We put ourselves in a high position and we look at God as the magic genie in the bottle, and we're going to rub that genie bottle anytime we want anything. That is so far from what we ought to be doing as believers. We as believers need to be living a life where we're putting God in a high position and we are in a low position. We are looking up to God. We are worshiping God. We are adoring God. We need to get serious about that today. We need to honestly reflect on ourselves and honestly reflect on our humility, honestly reflect on our submission as well. This is not a drudgery for James. He is serious about it. He loves being a slave. If you think today about positions, you think about Joe Biden or Donald Trump. They have both served as president of the United States. Donald Trump, before becoming president, was a real estate developer. Joe Biden was a senator before becoming president of the United States, and he was vice president just before becoming president of the United States. You think about these situations, and you realize that you call a person by their most important title. We will never hear Donald Trump be called Mr. Real Estate Developer Donald Trump again. Everyone calls him Mr. President. We will no longer be hearing Joe Biden called Senator Biden or Vice President Joe Biden. He is called President Biden because it's the highest title he's ever held in his life. I honestly, sincerely believe in James chapter 1, verse number 1, James says, James, a servant of God, because it is the highest title he's ever held in his entire life. It is more important than his position of pastor. It is more important than his family genealogy. James is focused on the fact that putting God in a high position, himself in a low position, being submitted and serving the Lord is the most important aspect of his entire life. Can I tell you today, it is a tremendous blessing that the Lord wants us to serve him, that the Lord would even have us to serve him in any capacity whatsoever. We serve an awesome and a mighty God. The creator of heaven and earth wants you to serve him today. He wants you to live for him today. He wants you to say, Josh, a servant of God, or whatever your name is, fill in the blank, a servant of God, as the most important position of your entire life. But for James, this wasn't just a title, this was a truth. James was submitted. James was obedient. And James was a servant. Are you those three things? Are you submitted? Are you obedient? Are you serving him? Are you focused on those three things today? If you're not serving him, I would encourage you to figure out a way to. And for the majority of individuals, that is going to be get plugged into a local New Testament church. Not just any old church, but get plugged into a good one where you can serve the Lord.